I'm pleased to introduce joining with us today is the president of Service Design Network, Miss Birgit Maga. She is the co-founder and president of the Service Design Network. And since 1995, Birgit has held the first European professorship for service design from the University of Applied Sciences in Cologne, Germany, and since then has continuously developed the field of service design in theory, methodology, and practice. Her numerous lectures, publications, and projects have strongly supported the implementation of a new understanding of the economic, ecological, and social function of design in the field of services. We're really pleased to welcome you to join us today, Birgit, and I would hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for this nice introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm really glad to be here in this webinar hosted by the World Design Organization. It has been a long-time dream for me to bring the Service Design Network to the table of the World Design Organization, because I feel that service design needs recognition and a voice in the global design community. And even more, I'm happy to share with you today, together with Polaine, some thoughts about what service design is and what the impact can be, and how service design can have a voice in the boardroom. So let me share my screen. So, again, I'm going to take you on a little journey through the world of service design. I've looked at the participant list, and I know that there are some of you very knowledgeable about service design, so forgive me for taking you quickly to some of the basics, because there are also quite a few people in the room who are probably pretty new to service design. So, as Andrea said, I'm teaching service design since 1995, and I do regard myself as a pioneer. At that time, in 1995, I was the first professor ever in the whole wide world. I was 35 years old, and I had the privilege of inventing, let's say, more or less new discipline of design. And I was starting this expedition in a time when there was a great socio-economic transformation, because until the late 80s, I would say our economy, at least in Europe, was very much focused on products and technology. And the same was true for design. Design was very much focused on products, on technology, on the material artifacts in this world. And a designer would always be creating tangible things, being it graphics, being it interfaces, being it products, furniture. And when I started, I ran into a quote from a famous German design theorist, and he said, "It is not the train that makes travel a successful experience, it is the schedule." And I thought, oh my God, that's ever so true. So yes, of course, it is important to have beautiful trains and comfortable seating and great schedules that are graphically well designed. But if the train does not come, we have a problem. So it does need service design as a way to really think about the experience of using a product or a service in a way that it creates value for all the different stakeholders. So services are living products. They are complex products. They are combining subsystems that are influencing each other. So when you are designing services, you are not designing dead materials. You are working with systems that are very alive, that have their own dynamics, and that you need some, let's say, very specific design approaches in order to create these systems in a valuable way. And I thought, for those of you who are rather new to service design, I share a short project which I've shared many times in my life, but I think it has the potential to show what service design does and what value is in service design. So let me quickly take you to a very first project which I did in the 90s of the last century. And it was a student project here at Köln International School of Design, where I'm teaching. A 7-week project, and I gave the students a challenge that was create innovative services for homeless people. So the students in this very early phase of service design did What they would also do today, they did an exploration of the system, trying to collect facts and figures, trying to understand who are the stakeholders involved nowadays in providing services to homeless people, what are the financial perspectives on support systems for homeless people. And after they had collected all these data and talked to different stakeholders, they took the deep dive into the world of the homeless people. Of course, you can never replace lived experience, but as a service designer, you try to get as much of an understanding of what a specific given situation means to people. So the students did observational studies. They asked the homeless if they could shadow them, if they could walk through the days with them, doing contextual interviews, trying to understand what are the pains during the day, what are the workarounds, what are the things that are really substantially difficult for them. And some of the students even left their money and their keys at home to step into a couple of nights on the road to better understand what it means if you don't have a warm bed and money for a hot meal or a drink. So after that exploration, the students said there are different types of homeless people. Today we would say personas. Some are voluntary or involuntary in homelessness. Some have drug or health issues, others don't. Some are long-term, some are short-term homeless people. And they have all one thing in common. It is very difficult to have a dignified life if you are living on the street. So the students said, the best thing would be if we could abolish homelessness. If everybody would have a home, that would be the best thing. But in 7 weeks, we cannot change the world. So let us try to create services that provide a dignified survival in homelessness. And they started to co-create with the different stakeholders, most of all with the homeless people. And they came up with many ideas, like this is an original photo from the 90s showing the permanent address, mailboxes. At that time, we didn't have the World Wide Web or mail addresses. So it was really about giving an address to these people so they could communicate with the administration, with potential landlords, with potential employers, just having an address. They came up with many ideas like having a little medical service that would take care of minor injuries before they became major issues. They had lots of ideas about hygiene services, giving a place to use the bathroom, having a shower, washing your clothes. And most of all, the students created this reception to send a clear signal that the homeless people would be guests in that space. And when these things were discussed with the homeless people, those said, well, why don't we pay a little bit for the services that we get at that place? Because then we would be customers. Oh, we thought that was really interesting that it is a specific role if you are a customer of a service, because then you have specific, let's say, rights. You are paying for what you get and you can demand a specific amount and a specific quality. So, yeah, after all these discussions, this was the final prototype we presented to the city of Cologne, to the churches, to the homeless people. And the funny thing was, everybody was enthusiastic. Not only about the idea that we would offer medical services, hygiene services, a place to be in the warm and protected environment, but also because there was an organizational structure behind this. The structure says that here homeless people have a job. You can get a job here and work in that space, because work and dignity, that's what the research showed, are also strongly connected. So we started to work in the implementation, and this is now what it is. It is called Gulliver, a survival station for the homeless. It is placed here in Cologne at the main station, and it has been in existence now for 24 years. It has become more than we conceptualized, because while we were implementing it, we found a larger space. So we created a little cafe. And you see here the homeless people working. They do everything. They do the shopping, the cooking, they are selling the food, they are cleaning the place, and they get paid for it. And that really had a major impact on the life of many people. This is the laundry room, and I like this picture because it shows that design is not about the most beautiful things. It's about things that work in a specific context. And in Gulliver, there has not been any vandalism for the last 20 plus years, which is great. So it really seems to work. This was the very first computer It has been replaced many times, and today basically every homeless has their own digital devices. And so what I really like about Gulliver, it is a living system. They reinvent themselves continuously. So this is one of the latest innovations. It is extra large lockers where the homeless people can leave their belongings for a longer period of time, so they are unburdened from carrying those things around. And this is a very bad photo of a loading station for digital devices, because since everybody now has digital devices, when you are homeless, the question is, where can you charge them without them being stolen if you don't have your eye on them? So this is a charging station for these digital devices. Yeah, so this was a project from the first generation of service designers. And I would say today that they were cartographers. We were drawing the first maps of service design, making definitions, defining processes, inventing methods that work in complex systems, defining our worldviews, and yeah, somehow collective wisdom. Those were the builders of the first settlements of service design. And you can imagine to build something that does not yet exist needs settlements. You need to put some anchors in the ground. And that was also one of the reasons why in 2004, me and a few other people set the seeds for the Service Design Network. There were people, agencies in London, Engine, LiveWork. It was universities like the Politecnico Milano or the IIT in Chicago, where this interest in designing immaterial systems had already emerged. And in 2008, we officially launched the Service Design Network as an organization with the mission to make service design the new normal, to make it something that every private or public organization would practice, to make it something that every university would teach to the design students, and to make it something where research funding would be given and the knowledge would be continuously developed. And to build a community of like-minded people so that we can learn from each other. So that was in 2008. And indeed, the outside world began to pay attention. Governments and business started to see the value of service design. And that was really even more than I had ever dreamed or expected when I started my professorship. So this is a landmark that many of you might know. In 2014, the UK government launched the Service Design Manual as the way of designing digital services. And that meant no solution without proper research. Uh, Always involve the relevant stakeholders, always involve the end user. Don't jump on the first idea. Make sure that there is co-creation happening and design alternatives are being created. And make sure that prototypes are being built and tested and that they are iterated before they are then finally launched to the greater public. The Service Design Manual, as I said, was for me a breakthrough, but at the same time, big companies like Lufthansa started to use service design to build innovations, for example, to become Europe's first five-star airline. That was through a service design project that was done by IDEO with some support from my research system here, team here at KIST. And yeah, so it's service design today is everywhere. This is an example from Finland, the Oulu University Hospital, one of the largest hospital systems in Finland. They said that they want to become the world's smartest hospital through the process of service design. So they involved everybody, not only the patients, but also the different stakeholder groups within the hospital, nurses, doctors, administrators. They did observational walks, they did all kinds of workshops and enactments. In the end, they had over 400 workshops, over 1,000 hours of time investment, with over 5,500 healthcare professionals involved to create this new hospital system, which today is an outstanding example for what a hospital can be. And people from all over the world travel to Oulu to visit this hospital. And another example, just to give you more of a taste, what is this? It's a beautiful building. Great architecture, but this UDI library, the Public Library of Helsinki, is indeed a service design project. This is the website of the UDI library. So the library has been designed together with the citizens and all other stakeholders to be a library that is what we need in our times. We don't need books only. We need culture. We need sharing of culture. We need access to culture. So in this library, you can indeed borrow opera cards or a car. You can sew your clothes and you can do AI-driven innovation in virtual reality. So it's basically everything. And people in Helsinki are unanimously proud of what this library does for the city and the citizens. So throughout these years, I would say the second generation of service designers has taken the stage. For them, the processes are like breathing. You do in-depth research. You do define the problem space. You do open up to ideate and co-create. You do define concepts that you prototype and test and iterate. And you work for implementation. It is not for creation of storyboards or nice ideas. A good service design project is trying to make change really happen. So the second generation is not really keen to have this shiny but shallow design theaters, but to make real change happen. And the role of the service designer has expanded. We connect to clients as users. So it is not only about the end user focus, we really need to perceive our clients as users, and we need to understand their objectives, their ecosystems, their language. We need to make them the heroes of transformation and not mere bystanders where the creative designer pops up on the stage with funny solutions. No, it's really about having the client as a co-creator of innovation. We have to build networks. We have to find allies beyond the obvious. As a designer alone, you cannot make transformation happen. So you have to create ecosystems of change makers within organizations in order to strengthen the way design works. You have to master AI as a tool and not as a replacement of your own work. So service designers today are architects of more meaningful digital era. And last but not least, service design can do a lot. It comes in many different shapes and colors. It can come as a research team, it can come as workshop facilitators, it can come as visualizers, and it can come as transformation facilitators for organizational change. It can come for business innovation or ecological renewal. And you have to be very clear if you do service design, where are your frontiers and what is it that the project is trying to achieve. So as designers, we don't have the authority to force change, but we do have the power to inspire it. That was what Dan Hill said in Dark Matters and Trojan Horses. And to add, we have the power to lead it. And that is maybe the point where I would like to hand over to Andy Polaine, who is here with me today. And let's put the spotlight on Andy. He is a design leadership coach, and service design is in his DNA, I would say. He is one of the most expert service designers I know, innovation consultant, and he will help us to better understand how service design can enter the boardroom and what leadership and service design can make happen in reality. So Andy, great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Round of applause. Interestingly, I'll come to why I was late in a second. So I'm going to talk about this. I'm slightly self-promoting here. We've just, in October, released the second edition of our book about service design. And it's 12 years, it's actually 14 since we started writing it, but it's 12 years since it was published. And originally I was like, oh, I don't want to write another book or a second edition. And then Ben and Lavrens and I, Lavrens Lovely and Ben Reason, but co-founders of Live Work, sat down and go, well, what has changed over the time and what has remained the same? And it was kind of a very interesting conversation, and it kind of connects into this because one of the things that we talked about in the original book was this idea of the need for the shift from industrial thinking to a service kind of mindset. And there has been in the last 15 years this rise of, or the resurgence of digital product design and leadership and product-led companies. And with that, you get the kind of language of product and the language of industrialization, which is, people talk about shipping a digital product and they don't, right? You just upload code to someone else's computers somewhere. the idea of kind of an assembly line is you break down a complicated task and you break it down into small parts so that sort of unskilled labor, each person can just do a thing. They don't need to have to know the big picture. And they just, put on their wheels or they put on their windscreen wipers, on a car. And the actual thing itself, the car obviously gets built, but the design of it doesn't change from one end to the other. It's not a kind of ecosystem. And what we've seen with that is it's been very, very popular. It's created an awful lot of efficiencies and it's done a lot of good stuff too. But it's also brought back that kind of way of thinking that's quite siloed. So in digital, you see feature teams on an app that are working on different parts of it, and they don't speak to each other, and that's a problem. And there's a thing we said in the book, which was one of my, I don't think I wrote this. I think Lavren said this, but or Ben, but they think I wrote this, so I don't know who wrote it. But with this service design, services created in silos are experienced in bits. So when you have that kind of disconnected point of view, services start to really suffer. Now, the reason why I was late is because Zoom had an outage and I couldn't log into Zoom. And there's been that recent AWS outage. There was another one recently too. There was a Microsoft one as well recently. And you see actually how fragile all of these digital things we think are products or get talked about in products, but they're not. Right? All of these things are actually services. And when their servers go down and you try and open the app and you just get little placeholder squares, then you realize that that's how you know, right? Because there's an ecosystem that's supporting these things and they just don't work. The apps themselves or the websites and stuff, they are just proxies to the service. They're just a touch point to the service. And the reason why this matters is obviously it matters quite a lot in digital, but it also matters a lot when you start mixing them. So these are not the tulip fields that you might think they are. They're actually the discarded bikes from bike shared bikes in a place in China. And they're literally mountains of these. There's a picture of a guy sort of cycling past a mountain of these. And so what happens is when you take that kind of mindset of product where, we manufacture a thing, we put it out into the world, and then we don't have to kind of think about it anymore. And you link that together with the kind of digital disruption, launch and scale approach of Silicon Valley, you start to have some really, really major problems. This obviously being one of them, right? And so this is one of the reasons why I think that service design at the deepest company level, like what is our business model, what are our responsibilities, how does our ecosystem work, not just within our company, but from the raw materials through to what do we do with the stuff, where does our responsibility end at the other end? That is really important. And if you try and tackle complexity, so complexity different from complicated, right? Complexity is stuff where everything is linked to everything else, and you try and tackle it with by oversimplifying it, then you end up producing these simplistic solutions that also fail. And you kind of just see examples of this over and over again. So, what and Birgit's just talking about somewhat before was in that kind of ecosystem view, and any of you who know this scene from The Empire Strikes Back will know, the Yoda is telling Luke that the force surrounds us, it is between everything. This idea of everything kind of interacting with everything else is a real systems thinking point of view, right? So, a system is this group of interacting, interrelated or interdependent parts that form this complex and unified whole that has a specific purpose. And so that industrial metaphor is breaking everything into small parts and to manufacture it and to make ease of manufacture or efficiencies of manufacturing starts to fall apart, or it really does fall apart when you connect it all together. And I think one of the things that service design brings is that point of view of this dance between, yes, we need to look at the individual things, but you also need to look at the ecosystem within those in which those things are going. So one of my favorite sort of metaphors instead are gardens, and in this case, landscape gardens. So I'm English, as you can hear, and in England there are lots of these beautiful stately homes, and the designers of these, in this case, Capability Brown, Humphrey Repton, they are two very famous late 18th century landscape gardeners. They're creating these things designing these things that they're not going to see the maturity in their lifetime. And I like to think of, the major services in our lives. You think of things like mobility, communications, welfare. You think of things like I want to say communications, finance, and all of those things. Those are things that have been around for longer than any of us here on this call, since before we were born, and they'll be around after we die. And I think it's very, very important to kind of think about how we are good ancestors for the future. And some of the stuff, for example, the service design stuff going on at sort of gov.uk and previously in America before Doge wrecked it, is really, really important because that sets up a real baseline for stuff in the future. It's incredibly important. But the thing is about services is they are sort of nested in complexity. So no touch point or no business exists in a vacuum, right? So every part is connected. So you might have a single touch point, and this is the kind of product point of view, right? This is the app or this is the website. But that's living inside a multi-channel service, right? That has multiple different touch points. If you think of an airline, all the different ways you can have contact with the airline, and that could be, the obvious ones like a website, an app, and people. But there's other things like print material and stuff like that, and other people's point of view. And that lives inside this, and that in turn is living inside this business ecosystem, which might have multiple services. And that lives inside this PESTLE, this political, economic, social, technological, and environmental and legal ecosystem. Right? And those things, there's a really interconnected, and the complexity gets just exponentially greater. And so part of the job and part of, I think, the skill that service design brings is being able to zoom between those zoom levels through process and through ways of thinking and ways of working that allow you to design each part, but not lose the connective tissue between them. And that's a really important aspect. I have a big, longer story I'll do a short version of this, which is in Melbourne in Australia. I used to live in Australia. They launched this thing called the Mikey card, which is, the touch payment thing for travel. And one of the things they did when they communicated it was, marketed it originally, was don't forget to tap on and tap off. But actually, or touch on and touch off. But actually what was happening is the card readers were laggy. And there was a whole bunch of a collection of different touch point fails. So it was the card readers were laggy, their website wasn't working. When you wanted to recharge your card, which you would expect to be able to do instantly, because the moment you get on the train, the tram is where you realize it's not charged. Initially, it took 7 days to update your card. And so all these things that constellated into a disaster. And the lived experience of that, of humans, where they were desperately trying to just tap their card over and over again whilst they were getting off a tram, blocking the tram from moving. And the whole point of this was trams in Melbourne share the road with the cars. And so if the trams are stopped, all the traffic stops too. So the whole point of speeding it all up actually had the opposite effect. And then it did a kind of bunch of adjustments to it. They brought in a management consultancy to do it. The budget blew out massively. And this is public money, right? So I just gave a list of some of the things you could buy with that money, but it became a sort of massive disaster. And it's really this constellation of touch points and how they meet the human experience. And so this is why I keep that ecosystem thinking is really important. Which brings me really to the last point of organizational change. One of the things you see in organizations is the short cycle of like quarterly reporting, initiatives, customer experience initiatives kind of being launched, or sort of very one-sided or sort of narrow initiatives being created. And I had this too. I worked on a project years ago for a telco in Australia, and literally 5 years later, a different client stakeholder came and said, so we're trying to do this new thing, customer experience, all the rest of it. Here's some work that some people did 5 years ago. And I said, we did that. My colleague and I, who were actually working at different companies at the time, I said, I have the photos of the Post-it notes that make up that journey map that you are holding in your hand. And he said, and I've got the original files. What happened? And what happened was that the stakeholders changed, the company had some sort of reorg, but underneath the underlying structure never really kind of changed. And so they got caught in this, what I call organizational amnesia. And you end up with these kind of zombie processes, right? There's a reason, something happens for some reason, nobody really knows why. There's a policy about something, nobody really knows why. And if you trace it back, sometimes it's absurd. And really what happens when you're trying to create organizational change is that the organization becomes the object, the design object. Right? And so you're really actually trying to redesign the organization. I have a kind of thing which I say, which is companies aren't really real. But they don't really exist. They're kind of just an idea. Yes, they have some assets, but if you think about it, all they are is really a collection of people trying to achieve something. And so actually, when you're trying to enact organizational change, what you're really doing is trying to change the way people work, and you're trying to change those habits and underlying processes. Otherwise, you don't really get the change. And so instead of sort of thinking around service design as a thing we just kind of add on top and make the touch points pretty, or organizational change from a spreadsheet point of view, you can think about organizational change or service design as a change methodology, right? Because one of the things that I think we know, for example, is that there's about 70% of change management programs fail. There's quite a broad lot of reasons why that is, but employee acceptance of change is one of the biggest predictors of success. And when companies are really not only focusing on, they don't really have a strong customer focus, they have a very kind of limited success in any transformations, and it massively goes up. It's like it jumps from about 21% to about 53% when they take a customer focus. And part of it is because when employees and customers are missing from the picture and you're trying to create this change, you don't get that support, right? You just get some kind of reaction. But at the same time, you also need to think about the entire ecosystem, what kinds of policies and processes and people are involved, along with the kind of classic product stuff or technology stuff. So, management tends to ignore frontline experience, right? If you speak to call center staff, they'll tell you exactly what's wrong with any service. You read the reviews on an app store, and they'll tell you what's wrong with the service. But they kind of ignore that. And that's that industrial legacy that the workers are the kind of blue collar, unskilled people, and management are in the glass box overlooking the factory, and they're the people who supposedly know what's going on. And at the same time, technology has a sort of people problem, right? Technology implemented without understanding how people interact with it also falls apart. And that's the story of Mikey. And so one of the things that service design is really powerful for is bringing that connection between lived experience, whether it's employees or customers, a strategic kind of lens of what should this offering be, how does it all hang together, how are we communicating that, and how the touch points interact with that kind of larger ecosystem view. And that combined with the kind of conversations you might be having in the boardroom, but all the way down the company is really important. And lastly, design's superpower is its ability to make ideas tangible, whether that is in diagrams and sketches and blueprints and all the kind of cliches, if you like, of service design, also through to prototypes. Because once you've got that, you're having a conversation about a thing, and there's much less opportunity for misalignment. So that's my preaching for service design in the boardroom and the shift from industrial to ecological or so ecosystem thinking. I shall stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy and Birgit, for such engaging presentations. So now we'll move over to the Q&A section of today's webinar. Just to quickly introduce myself. So my name is Dorothee Ballard. I'm WDO's Community Engagement Officer, and it's great to see so many WDO members on the call. If you are new to WDO, please do feel free to contact me, and I'll add my email to the chat a bit later to find out more about WDO and the many benefits of WDO membership. So Birgit, if you would like to join us in I'll put the view so we have the multi-speaker. Okay. So I've had one or two questions, and I will start with this one. So what kind of challenges does service design face when trying to engage at the most senior levels? And maybe over to you, Andy.
The word design. I mean, I think still there's this problem that, and this is why I was saying, if you think, it's in the book actually about design as a change methodology. If you talked about that instead of using the word design, you just get a different kind of mindset. And I think well, there's two challenges really. One is that I think design gets seen as like, why would people who make posters and pretty stuff have anything to say in this area? And so I think that understanding of the mismatch between the artifacts of design, the things that design produces and people commonly know, versus that kind of thinking stuff that we were just talking about, that's a challenge, and a way to combat that challenge is what I was saying, which so you were able to make an idea tangible quickly, and that can be quite a powerful force for change. Because once people see a thing, they can go, "Oh yeah, well no, obviously we want that," and so that's quite powerful. I think the second thing is this tension between the desire to have something very predictable and kind of process led, and we know exactly what's going to happen, a year from now, versus design is inherently has this, it's process led, and we don't really know what the outcome might be, but we know we will get there, and that's a real kind of cultural clash, and that's really difficult. So you have to do a lot of sort of working out loud to mitigate the sort of fears and anxieties that creates.
Yeah, I would like to build on that, if I may. There's a lovely book called Managing as Designing, and it kind of tries to show how in the past managers were trying to be under control, trying to be the decision makers, trying to be the ones who take the responsibility. And these times are changing. So it's more about leadership as a way of enabling, a way of co-creating futures, of prototyping futures, of making decisions that are always based on incomplete data, and regarding that as a design process that is collaboratively done. And I would, instead of managing as designing, say leading as designing, because leadership is a bit more about, creating that energy to move forward, creating that energy for change, and having that mindset in leadership in the C-suite is sometimes not yet given. I think even the younger C-suite people feel that they need to be managers, as opposed to allowing themselves to be leaders that use design as a means to create a future in a collaborative way.
Great. Thank you, Birgit. And I think linked to that, where might the discipline be situated within the organization?
It's a hard question. Do you have any? I have a few views on this, but do you want to go first, Birgit, or shall I?
Happy to start. I think there's multiple scenarios, just very concrete. Here in the city of Cologne, for the last 6-7 years, we've been working with service design into the digital transformation, and that has led to an innovation office that is placed directly at the mayor's office. And I think that's a great way to position service design, right in the top level, so that it is involved in developing strategies, developing policies, helping to change culture within the organization. And you can only do that when you have direct access to influential financial and decision-making processes. But I also know that there are service design labs that are rooted in the marketing department, for example, helping to better understand what our market needs, how can we translate market needs into offerings that are valuable for the company and for the end user. So it can be like very operational. And I would say anything in between. I have done a research a couple of years ago together with Deutsche Telekom about in-house service design that is available for free on our Service Design Network website. And that shows 4 quadrangles where service design can be positioned for business innovation, customer satisfaction, and two others. I don't want to take too much time, but I think it's really interesting that there's a multitude of options on where to position service design.
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the things, I mean, everything that Birgit just said, one of the things I've seen in the last few years actually is evidence of what I just talked about, which is in digital, that there are these kind of product teams or feature teams, and they have got siloed. And service designers are often brought in to work horizontally across them, you know, because there are advantages to those teams working in those little kind of towers, but then service designers work horizontally to kind of map out. The most obvious example, or the most well-known, is probably Airbnb, where, you know, Brian Chesky was basically at that point where I've got all these little factories in my company. I don't really understand how our company works anymore. And so Rebecca Jimenez and her team did this huge kind of blueprint of how Airbnb kind of works, right? And that worked. She worked horizontally. There is still an organizational problem with those people. Who do they answer to? Do they answer to the CTO or the CEO or the CPO? And it is difficult. I think partly though, maybe the question is wrong in that, you know, for a company, for that real organizational shift, everyone has to be kind of thinking in a different kind of mindset. And it's not necessarily that everyone is a service designer with those specific skills, but I do think that much of the mindset of service design and some of the skills really belong to everyone in the organization. So it's kind of a bit like, if you're not careful, it's a bit like saying, where does business live in the organization? Right? And we wouldn't ask that question.
Okay, so we have another question. How does service design's ability to drive ecosystem thinking change when you're working with tight budgets, short timelines, and fixed scopes versus when you have more resources, time, and flexibility?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think we have to learn to work in a more agile way. In the earlier times, we really enjoyed the in-depth research. We put a lot of time and effort into creating journey maps and personas that were really beautiful and of course also expensive because they took a lot of resources. And I think now with AI coming and taking a seat at the table, we have to use the capacities that brings and unburdens us from some tasks without taking away the responsibility for proper research also in marginalized areas where AI has a total blind spot. But we need to use these resources in order to speed up our process. And the other thing that I would like to add, and I've mentioned it earlier, I think we can't do it alone. I think we have to try to create a movement within organizations, and we have to try to find those stakeholders in HR, in organizational development, in the financial department, in the IT department, that want to make change happen in a way that is different from the past. And I think if we have those, let's say, networks, those movements, it also helps to speed up processes. That's my take.
Yeah, I agree. There's a show don't tell aspect to this as well. I think that, you know, the bit that worries me about that is the fixed scope, because it kind of depends on what they mean. If an organization is interested in changing and they have a fixed scope, then they're not really interested in changing, right? So as a part of it is a kind of attacking that original problem. But I do think one of the things that we can do is show how stuff is connected and show how these problems occur. And sometimes there's a problem down here at the beginning, backstage, that surfaces as a customer's problem later on. And they're apparently disconnected, but actually when you trace it, you actually see it. No, they're not. They are connected. And so, you know, one of the things of that is when you show and don't just kind of tell people, the storytelling is really important. Sometimes the mock-ups and prototypes and, you know, demos and all those things, which you can now do quite quickly, are important. And once you get to there, then you've got some kind of buy-in, and then you can kind of backtrack and go, okay, well, we're here and we've got this idea, but it's based on a whole bunch of assumptions. So and assumptions are risky. And do we want to take that risk? And so talking in terms of risk is usually a thing that gets the leadership into action of like, well, no. So how can we find some risk? You know, how can we mitigate that risk? And some of that is going back to do some research and so on. So I think it's often a question of how you present the story.
Hey, thank you very much, Andy. I think we have time for just one more question. So one of our participants said, I overheard a comment recently. It's easier to justify a CTO over a CDO. So what's the return on the investment on service design, end-to-end experience design? And how do we best measure that? Do you have any good examples?
Yeah.
Go on, Birgit, go.
Okay, I'll prepare the ground for you, Andy.
Thank you.
So I think there's multiple facets of value that service design creates, from cultural change, where there's, let's say, more motivation to make change happen, from better involvement of point of view of different stakeholders, which leads to more robust solutions, which are implemented quicker and more successfully in organizations. It can be higher customer satisfaction. It can be employee satisfaction. It can be higher revenue. So that Ricardo Martins has published a really nice poster with the different types of value that service design creates. But I think the key issue is that designers need to be more consistent in measuring. And that means that at the beginning of the project, you have to make very clear what would be the success measures for the project, because only if you think about it in the beginning, you will be able to measure it in the end. And if you want to speak the language of the boardroom, facts and figures are part of that language. We need to produce them, we need to share them. So first, make yourself knowledgeable about the existing facts and figures that are out there. Plus, in your own projects, make sure you measure, and measuring starts in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is often overlooked, is to get your sort of baseline data. I think, you can look across customer experience stuff, and you can look across business and operations as well. So, there's a project that I know of, and it was for a telco, and there was a customer experience aspect to it, which was about how long it takes to get your landline installed. But actually, the backstage thing was developing some stuff that made it quicker for engineers to install that landline, and it saved them about 20 minutes per job. But it aggregated to about 2 hours a week, or two extra jobs, or I think four extra jobs a month. And there's 3,000 techs in Australia. So when you aggregate that stuff up, it was saving that company $4 million a month.
Yeah.
Right? So I was just going to say, when the ecosystem view is your advantage, right? Because you can measure each of those things, and they have different metrics. And if you're just looking on financially, you can aggregate that stuff up, and often the numbers add up to a lot. But when they're individually looked at, it seems like it's not worth doing.
And I can really just recommend, go to the SDN website and look at the case study database. There is award-winning service design projects. Most of them had to make proof of their impact, and so measures are part of that.
Yeah. Ben also rewrote the metrics bit of our book. That chapter is new, as is the organizational change one, actually. I guess this, if I'm facetious too, I would really question the ROI of many C-suite people. It's quite, the CEO. I think it's a bit of a blunt instrument to just think of it in terms of finances. But I think you can definitely think of outcomes, and start there, and then you find the metrics to measure those outcomes. And it's not always numerical. You have to be a bit careful that you don't end up just focusing on the things that are easy to measure. There's that, what's his name, Bruce Cameron something, who said, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. It's we have to also look at other things too.
Yeah, maybe that opens the door for a few final words before our time is up. Is that okay, Dorothy?
Yes, of course. I'm pleased to hand over to you, Birgit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Okay, I think we have shown that the role of service design is evolving. It will continue to evolve through economic change, ecological and social challenges, through technological innovation. And the third generation of service designers is in the making, and they are learning new things. They are preparing for new challenges, and the Service Design Network is really triggering and supporting knowledge generation and knowledge sharing. And I think that is so important in this ever-changing ecosystem, that we continuously are learning and sharing our knowledge. And the Service Design Network is trying to push the boundaries of service design, because I think there is still room on the top to have disciplines understand how important it is to use the service design approach for transformation, for innovation. And in the end, the Service Design Network is nourishing networks and communities, because I think that we need to share and to support each other. And I think the service design community is an outstanding example for an extremely open and sharing community that is so inspiring. So if you want to become a member, this is the day you should do it, because today we have a 30% discount. If you scan that QR code, it leads you to the membership page. There is free community membership, but there is also paid membership, which we appreciate because we are a non-profit organization with many volunteers working all over the world to push the discipline forward. As a member, you have access to Touchpoint, the Journal of Service Design, which is published 3 times a year. It is for free for members. We have a database of almost 50 issues that cover a huge spectrum of different topics. The latest issue is Business Transformation by Design, so that might be really interesting for you. So as a member, you have free access to all those digital issues, but of course you can also download them as a non-member and pay for them. And last but not least, we are very happy to announce that we are part of the World Design Capital 2026, thanks to the World Design Organization. And the World Design Capital will be in Frankfurt, Rhine-Main region in Germany. And as our headquarters is located in Germany, in Cologne, we are very happy to be organizing the Global Service Design Conference 2026 in the Frankfurt Rhine-Main region at the end of October 2026. So if you want to stay tuned, just follow us on the social media. For now, I would like to thank you on behalf of Andy, Dorothy, and myself, on behalf of the World Design Organization and the Service Design Network. I hope we were able to inspire you, and please stay tuned. Thanks so much.